I just wanted to say thank you everyone for who's here today. Today is the second episode from the Artist Talk series. We're on our second season currently. And today we have Vikram Divecha, who is going to be joining us. And he'll be speaking about a few projects of his and also his general approach to his practice, his process. And if you would be so kindly to mute yourselves throughout the presentation, and then we're going to have 20 minutes towards the end of the session for any questions, whether you would like to pop them into the chat throughout or even unmute yourself in the last 20 minutes and ask it live. We'd love to hear your voices and see your faces. So let's get right to it. So Beirut-born, Mumbai-bred, Vikram Divecha is an artist based in Dubai. His practice raises questions about time, value, and authorship by engaging people across urban and social spheres and working with available material and space. Divecha terms this approach as found processes, which often sees him intervene within public and social systems. From wholesale exporters to municipal gardeners, architectural consultants to railway traffic managers, Divecha's participants inform and shape his projects in various ways, at times for sustained durations. These attempts translate into public art, site-specific interventions, workshops, installations, moving images, paintings, surfaces, drawings, photographs, performances, and texts. Divecha holds an MFA in visual art from Columbia University and was a participant of the Whitney Museum's Independent Study Program. His exhibitions include Jameel Art Center Dubai, the Jewish Museum New York, Wallach Art Gallery New York, 57th Venice Biennale, 13th Sharjah Biennale, Louvre, Abu Dhabi, Gallery Isabelle van den Eynde in Dubai, in Alserkal, Contemporary for Contemporary Art in Warsaw. Grants, commissions, and scholarships include the Sharjah Art Foundation, the Arab Fund for Arts and Culture, the Salama bint Hamdan and Nahyan Foundation, and some residencies include the Land Art Mongolia and Temporary Art Platform in Lebanon. So it's a little bit of an introduction, and then Vikram will also be going more into his work and his practice. So if you'd like to share your screen.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah, for the lovely introduction. And great to see so many faces, so many friends over here. And also new people that I'm slowly getting to know. I was away from the UAE for the last 3 years, studying. As you mentioned, I got a scholarship from Sheikh Salama, and I finished my MFA, and I spent 1 more year out there. And I've come back now, and in a sense, I'm restarting and I'm reconnecting with new people. And I was talking with Colleen Hasber, a very dear friend of mine, an artist, about how the scene has changed, and I would like to engage with the young new artists over here, and also with fresh minds. I've started teaching at the American University of Sharjah as an adjunct professor. So it's an exciting moment for me, although I realize you're in the middle of a large situation, but I find energy over here which propels me. So thank you, Sarah, again for having me over here. So let's get this one rolling. And how do you start a presentation? Like, the first slide is always a major hurdle. So back in school in Bombay, we learned Shakespeare, and the final play that we learned was Julius Caesar, and I always remember this one dialogue: "Beware of the Ides of March." And the Ides of March is the 15th of March, this very day we have today. In Latin, Ides of March is the 15th of March, and a soothsayer in the public is warning Julius Caesar about his assassination. Let's not get into those details, but I'm very interested in the sound of the Ides of March. It's a very public sound that everyone heard that. That's always echoes in me, like the Ides of March. Every time this day comes back every year, I always recall that moment. And we had a very dramatic Professor Tellis, who would narrate out all of Julius Caesar. So it all is a sound piece for me as much as a text piece for me. And I'm interested in the public nature of sound in this specific example. Like when we think about, if I think about growing up in Bombay, I was telling my wife's talking the other day that sometimes I've heard a song in a public place for the first time. You know, once it's emitted, you enter that space because the sound creates a large room in the public area, and you all are included. And the Ides of March makes me think about that, and hopefully I'll speak about some of my projects which try to delve into the public space. Um, yeah, like when I think also about the azan in the UAE, that's a very public, sound where we all get involved within it. You know, even if you are not following or not are following, it's a container that wraps you. And I look for those experiences at times in my work. And yeah, it's nice to have a talk on the Ides of March, and the notion of that public brings me to another term, which is again from my childhood, the word aflatun. And for the longest time, I misunderstood what this word meant. As a young boy growing up in Bombay, initially Beirut, but then Bombay, and the misunderstanding was we always thought aflatun meant somebody behaving as an eccentric in public, or what's he up to? Why is he doing that? Or why is she doing that? And you just point out and say, hey, aflatun. And that's a word that just sort of, remained me for the longest time. That the misunderstanding remained with me for the longest time. But at some point, I realized that aflatun essentially has come down from Arabic through Urdu. And aflatun means Plato, the Greek philosophers. And I'm interested in this notion or this approach, if not of Plato, but of Socrates, of how they went in the public and they conducted their philosophy by questioning people on the street. And that's something that's important for me. I mean, I don't know if all my projects will encapsulate that idea, but again, the public is a place, that is where my practice has often been located. And the street is important to me, and the encounters that one has in the city or the space is largely my practice is urban. For me, are my material. Like for me, the city, the people, the space, the skill sets for the longest time in the UAE became my material. And yeah, what was I saying? I just forgot my train of thought. But yeah, trying to kind of develop a knowledge within the city as a studio, that what emerges through these encounters, what happens when working with these materials, be it people, be it space, be it skill sets, is an approach I developed, which eventually translated into a term called found processes, which I might elaborate on. But yeah, let me just get rolling into a few projects, as I call them, over the years. And this is one of my initial projects, which is called Degenerative Disarrangement. This was shown in 2013 at a local art festival called Sikka, which is very special to me. It's held in a historic district, or what they say, a historic neighborhood. And this is an aerial image of the installation. And my installation comprises these pavement bricks, and the patterns on the bricks are scattered and disarranged.
Sorry to interrupt you, but that we can only still see the text, not the aerial images.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Now?
Still. What if you stop sharing screen and then share your full screen? Okay, now we can.
Wow. And now?
Yeah, it's working. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So yeah, this is an aerial view of the installation in a traditional Arabian courtyard. And what's going on is that, yeah, excuse my large mouse. Since I teach now, I have to have this big paw so I can direct my students all around, look over here, look over there. And yeah, bear with it. But it opened up with my observations on the street where I used to live behind Mall of the Emirates in an area called Barsha. I've moved now. And I encountered a large area of these pavement bricks where they all were scattered. It seemed like somebody had really misarranged them. It seemed mischievous. It seemed careless. And I started speaking with the contractors at different sites and what's going on, because often when you walk around in Dubai, you will find these no parking lines on bricks, these parallel yellow lines. And then there's a lot of roadworks. As you know, this place is constantly digging itself and reinventing itself. And these bricks get removed to possibly repair some pipes underneath. And when the bricks are put back, you often find these scattered patterns. And I got into a conversation with this contractor. And I feel like what helped at that point also is because I can speak different languages in India, from being from India, I can navigate different communities. And he explained me that it's a concern of time and value. He said that essentially my masons have to put the bricks back very quickly for two reasons. One is we have to return the thoroughfare so people can use it for parking, for driving, for walking, etc. And secondly, I can't expect my masons to spend hours trying to resolve this jigsaw puzzle. I also need to maintain a profitable business. So I sat down with him, I went back a few times, we had a few coffees or whatever. And we figured out how much time he would give his mason per square meter to put the bricks back, to keep his business profitable, to remain within a constraint which is agreeable. And after I found that, I went to the municipal office over here for at least a month and a half. And I found this one person and I said, I want to extract bricks from a public site for an art installation. And eventually these bricks over here were extracted. This is a bus station in Dubai called Al Dubeba bus station. And these bricks were all extracted. And we brought them down to this location. This location is the same as earlier, the courtyard image that you saw. And I hired a mason. I said, like, this is it. You only have so much time to arrange these bricks, as simple as that. And this individual whose name is Hilal quickly arranged the bricks. And that's how this work was born. Yeah, it's dealing with questions about, time and value and time constraints, as we all understand, but also this question of an irreparable condition, that once a brick is removed from its original place, you cannot really fit it back. It doesn't really fit into place again. It thinks about also, the conditions of an expat in that sense. I mean, there are a lot of different ways we can think about this. Somebody called this an abstracted carpet. It was set within the courtyard of a place. But yeah, I mean, I keep this piece. And there are ways we can approach this, and there are people who can speak about this in a much more elegant manner than me. But then this work sat in that courtyard in Sikka for 5 years, and it was full of pigeon poop all over. But at some point, a curator named Hamad Nasser came in, and he took these bricks to a fancier location to exhibit in Italy. So yeah, these bricks have moved around, not just between a bus station and a exhibition site, but even across continents. Yeah, so this is one of the few projects that I developed initially, and through this engagement with the city, with people, with processes, with materials and sites, I developed this idea which emerged from that, which I label as found processes. And so I'm going to jump to another project. I made a lot of work between 2013 and 14 and 15, but we want to discuss a few things out here, and Sarah, let me know about my time. But this is a project called Boulder Plot, which is a public art installation that I did in 2014. And it comprises of 24 giant boulders. Each one is 4 to 7 tons each. And the work was exhibited within this construction fencing. So from outside, it looks like a typical construction site, which you constantly encounter in the UAE. And when you look closely, each boulder has a perfectly cylindrical hole running through it, absolutely straight. And so as you walk around, as you move around these boulders, these gouged boulders, as I described them, um, possibly start looking back at you. Um, so this project started with me, with my interest in UAE's construction industry, of course, but also from the position of this fractured position of my relationship with the environment, which I always think about coming from this place of being an urban kind, as I would describe at that point. And this takes me back to a little anecdote. While I was working in Dubai at some point, and I was speaking with a colleague, and I asked him where is he going for his holiday. And at that point, we all were backpacking and doing things, and he just looks back at me and he dismisses my question and says, "I'm going back to my native place." Like, what a ludicrous question to ask! Like, where are you going for your holiday? And he would take a month-long break to go back to a village in India. And then he went on to describe, where he was going back to and where he grew up. And anyhow, post that conversation, I came back and sat on my desk because I had a desk job back then. And what I realized was that unlike this colleague of mine, I don't have a relationship with a river, or I don't have a relationship with a mountain or a tree. Um, Rather, my relationship when I go back to Bombay is with traffic jams, with noise pollution, with aging buildings. And that's something I think about, and I do realize there is a certain romantic notion of trying to return to a place, but this work, in a sense, was trying to question that I do have a relationship, or rather put forward, I do have a relationship with the environment. And so at some point, I befriended a rock blasting engineer who works in the northern Emirates of UAE called Fujairah. And Fujairah is blessed with these rock mountains, gabbro rock mountains. And they keep decimating these mountains to create pulverized rock, which is used in the construction industry. So your concrete is made from these rocks, cement, and water. So these mountains essentially are, brought down and then raised again to live in the towers we live. And UAE is, I've seen UAE really come up. Like I've seen it literally surface, at a pace that I haven't experienced before in my life. And so the process again out here, and this engineer took me around to different sites and showed me his process of blasting rocks. And what goes on is that, so just give me a second because there's some sound coming in which is really annoying me. I'm just going to mute myself for a second.
In the meantime, if anyone has any questions and is interested in anything that Vikram has said recently, please put it in the chat and we'll get to it after his presentation. Is it better now?
Sorry about that. But yeah, we were here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So So he took me through the rock blasting process, and what happens is that they go on top of these mountains and they drill these holes. Like you have a plateau, like a surface, and they drill 30 to 40 holes, around 8 centimeters in diameter, and they fill it with explosives, and then they blast these mountains off. And and uh, and I was privy to this really violent process. And what happens is when these stones or large rocks get dislodged, at times you are left behind with boulders with this gouged hole from the initial drilling process. And these really spoke to me very strongly. Um, and so for my installation, I went through different quarry yards, and I selected, I think, around 24 boulders, and with these specific holes, and I brought them back to Dubai. And that was the installation that you saw earlier. But this was a long process, um, a long process of engaging with this industry and community of people who work in Fujairah. And so I remember at some point, my conversations with the rock blasting engineer went on for like a few months, and he lived in a building very close to the quarries, in a very tall building. And over time he realized, where I was getting at. I was trying to ask a specific question through my inquiry, and then from his window one day he pointed out to a mountain, because he lived in a tall building, and he showed me a mountain. And he said that, Vikram, when I came to live over here around 10 years ago, I could not see that mountain because there was a mountain before that. But over time, they leveled the mountain down, and so we could see the mountain behind. And that, so I, and that's what maybe this illustration or drawing work tries to think about. But it was really sort of being in that building at that moment really made me think about how you inhabit the mountains again, in this process of erasing um, um, some of our natural the materials available. So there's a few more images of the boulders, and at some point it even turned up on Google Images. And this construction site is how you initially encounter the work. And it's a very typical site in Dubai, these construction sites. And again, this construction site, the size of this plot was based on the building I lived in Al Barsha. So there were all these personal references. Some were subtle, some were a little more. And the work was a temporary work. So it was up for 9 months, and it was very clear for me as I put in the proposal that I'm bringing in these boulders to exhibit them. But at the end, I'm going to resend them back to the quarry yards. They will be crushed and pulverized and re-enter the market. So these objects, in a sense, are stationary for a while within the art context, where they get on a different meaning, but then they move on back to entering the systems of circulation, which is something I often employ, where I try to extract material in flows and then enter them into this art context, but they also go back. And there are multiple relationships with this specific object. Then it's a commercial object, it's within a cultural context, and blurring these lines has been important for me. And so what happened was that while we were installing this work, I wanted to, we wanted to clean the boulders because there's a lot of dust on them, for the opening. And I was working with, again, the same person who installed my bricks, Hilal, and I said, we need to clean these up. And he said the best way to do is to just hose them down with water. And so this was, again, something that just happened. It wasn't, intended. And I filmed that. And I'm going to show you a short excerpt of a film. Over here, it's a silent piece. Can you see my, no? Yeah, so I'm just going to share, like, can you see this now? this black screen.
Yeah, it's
So
showing.
this is like this is an excerpt of a video. Um, um, yeah, so we'll come back to, I don't know, where's my PDF gone now? Oh my God, what's going on? Can you see this PDF?
Yeah.
All right, so yeah, that's a video that emerged from that work, and I think there were other works as well. Maybe I should keep rushing, keep moving a little more, but yeah, it spoke to me a lot. I mean, part of the work was a very conceptual move of returning the boulders back, but then also that moment just spoke to me. It evoked, notions of cleansing and rituals, which I've experienced while growing up in India, but also wuzu and this idea of healing, and this idea also of heat and cooling. That the boulders came through a very violent heated process, and the watering spoke to me of a cooling process, the temperature difference. And it was a silent piece because I was more interested in the sense of touch that we all understand as bodies, how water touches us as against sound, So there's a few questions I'm trying to kind of even think about like how my projects also move around into different areas. But I'll move on. So in 2015, Murtaza Wali, who's a very dear friend and curator, who I believe is here, invited me to work on a public art project, maybe after seeing all those boulders out there. Um, and I got interested in working. So the invitation to work in a public park in Sharjah, and I entered into these conversations with these gardeners. And the invitation was if they would like to work with me on a workshop to create some hedge patterns in a place they maintained. So essentially, this hedge that you see out here was a box-shaped hedge. It's 100 meters. This is a small section of it. It's almost 100 meters long, and I spent almost 2 to 3 months with them working on this drawing workshop and getting to know them. And we developed all these patterns and drawings over time. And that's how we came to know each other even early on when I met the gardeners just through casual conversations. They couldn't figure out, who I was, because they would ask me, Vikram, like, are you in landscaping or are you in agriculture? Like, where do you come from? And that's an interesting part I find in the UAE, that the art world, I don't know how it is now, but 2014 or 15, it wasn't so formalized, right? You didn't have a public art department. So they couldn't figure out what this person wants. And eventually I would show them my older projects, and they realized there's certain aesthetic concern out there. And we worked on these drawing workshops, and they basically developed the hedge designs that you saw in the previous slide out here. I think what's interesting was how informal economies work in the UAE. Um, and remember also, like when I would go and meet the gardeners every morning, there was a very large park, so I would give them a call and say, I'm at this location, like, why don't we come over and start our drawing workshop? And they say, hey, Vikram, just give us like 5 minutes, and then I'll be waiting out there. And some days they would come, half an hour late. Some days they would come within 2 minutes. Some days they would come within 20 minutes. Some days they would give me a call, say, Vikram, we just cannot come today. So that 5 minutes was always, stretching and contracting. But in the afternoon, I had to kind of go back to my corporate job. So if I had a meeting at 3 o'clock, I had to be there at 3 o'clock. And there was a big contrast in my life at that point. And I enjoy working with these informal economies, although the gardeners are working with the municipality. Within us, there was a different space that was available. So as the work proceeded, there were like, it was a 100-meter hedge, and the idea was to give it to each gardener. And I said, okay, here's like the alphabetical system, and these are your names. And they disagreed with the alphabetical system. They said, why should the A, B, C, D decide who gets the first hedge? So I said, what do we do? So they said, let's do a lucky draw. So there was a lucky draw done, and that decided who got the first hedge, who got the second hedge. And I find these gestures, for me, that they are like, one could say they're futile, but I feel they are small ways of reclaiming the spaces, that you work in. Like, what does it mean to have a public space in the UAE is an important question, because we do curtail ourselves out here. And these are small moments that for me bring the project alive. And at some point, I got invited to work with an art gallery, and it was a difficult time for me, right? That I was working with all these public art projects and within social context, collaborative context. And what does it mean to kind of then, and I had a gallery earlier, but I left the gallery, and then I spent 2.5 years just doing these projects by myself. And at that point, I spoke to the gallerist that the fact is, is that you just don't represent me, because you have to represent many people, and so this is a work that there was an intervention within the gallery where I introduced the works of these gardeners, but the gardeners are stakeholders in this work. They can decide what shares go to whom. And this is, of course, I very much understood this is a project that cannot, materialize in sales right now. But that intervention exists within the economy of a gallery system, where the gallery was made to engage with these gardeners, and that gap remains available. And also the gardeners do realize that my projects take a long time to materialize, so I really am persistent. It takes me often a few years to get things moving, and they've come to realize that. And so my relationship with them has continued. And even back in 2015, what I realized was that all these gardeners, mostly from Pakistan, are not only gardeners, they are farmers. They have done some kind of farming while growing up. And they have an innate understanding, not innate, but what seems to me an innate understanding of soil, the water, the weather, the water. And back then I had proposed that let's do a farming project. And so eventually the project began materializing in 2017 through the Sharjah Biennial, where two gardeners flew back to Pakistan, and they came back with these heirloom seeds. But even in 2017, I didn't get permissions for sweet water, because public roundabouts have treated sewage water. And I was very insistent that this produce is for consumption. So I had to raise more funds to get a sweet water tank. And then eventually the gardeners, I think, went back again and got new seeds from their family farms. And these two gardeners, Shabir and Salim, they sowed almost 15 to 20 different seeds from their family farms. And then this produce was distributed amongst the neighborhood. I realized I'm running out of time, and I've hardly finished any of the work, so I'll just rush through. But yeah.
You can take your time, Vikram. We can stay
Yeah.
20 minutes more, yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny, right? Because you have March meetings going on and you have the cultural summit going on. So thank you so much for being over here. Because I would rather be at March meetings right now, but I'm so glad you all are here. But I mean, this is like, like Shabir, who's one of the gardeners, like we had these long conversations about going back to Pakistan and bringing back seeds, what does that mean? And I was really concerned because essentially, like, it's not the seeds, I call them as unregistered seeds, because you're not supposed to bring back the seeds, but there's a lot of secret farming that happens in the UAE. Like when you go to the camps and all, people bring back seeds from their homes and they grow them. And Shabir, who I've known for a long time, really wanted to get this project rolling. And he said that, that I'm going back to bring back seeds to come and sow them so that I can feed myself. There's no crime in feeding myself, And he calls me Vikram Bhai. Bhai means brother. He says, "Aap fikr mat karo, don't worry. I'll bring you seeds worth my body's weight." And that's something that really echoes with me, because they also realize that the seeds were a metaphor for their own circulation, coming from a smaller town, forced to come to cities, and how capitalism has forced all of us to move to deal with hunger at the core of it. And I don't know, maybe now I think about this attempt as a bit little lame, but this was in one way an ode to Shabir, but also to Felix Torres's candy work, where he made a work with candies that equated to his lover's weight in a corner of a gallery. But yeah, there's something about the seeds becoming the metaphor for these South Asian bodies that circulate through the UAE. And yeah, so like Shabir and Salim, really took on this place, and Shabir is a very friendly person. He's got a love for life and people, and so he and I was in the States by then. From 2017 to 2020, I was in the States. So for me, I could only access this project through WhatsApp and through our conversations. And he created a community around in Sharjah, and people would come over and get produce from him, and they took over this space. And again, like I call the project Beej. Beej means seeds in Urdu. But also, like, I realized that there's always a failing in what I call the project, because the people around call this Sabji roundabout. Sabzi means vegetables. And so, yeah, this is a moment that belonged to a community. Like even the Biennial crowd did not know where this roundabout was. There was no link or map. They only saw barren, the dead image of the early roundabout. And now I'm in conversations with Shabir. Like we've been speaking about, what that roundabout meant, and hopefully we're going to work on this poetry project. He's an amateur shire, and so yeah, like that's something I've been thinking about right now with Shabir. But I'll move on to another project called Warehouse Project. This was in 2016 at Alserkal Avenue, and I was interested in UAE as this node in the export-import market. UAE imports all these goods from Asia, India, China, Malaysia, and then it re-exports it from Dubai to the Middle East, Levant, and North Africa and beyond. So 80% of the goods that come to the UAE get re-exported. It's a constant movement. You have to go to these warehouses, how goods get stocked and unstacked, stacked and unstacked. And so I spend a lot of time engaging with the trading community in the UAE, which is largely a lot of Indians out there who go back a long time. There's a long history of UAE's trading with India. And that's a much more larger support system that is not so visible anymore, because tourism and real estate has taken over as the visible markers of UAE's economical structure or support system. But this is an important part of the UAE. And so essentially what I did was I was given a warehouse in Alserkal, a brand new warehouse in Alserkal for 4 months. And very briefly, what I did was I traded the warehouse space with a trading company needing extra storage space. So there was this one trading company called Atik Losi, which is run by an Indian, Chinese, and French guy. And they already have 5 warehouses close to Alserkal in Dubai, but they had this massive shipment coming in. And I spent 6 months talking to various, trading companies. And Sanju, who was the warehouse manager, he said, yeah, like we need a massive warehouse because all this stuff is coming from China. And if we want to rent a new warehouse, we can only rent a new warehouse in Ajman. And I said, but here's it. I can give you this warehouse for free, 0 rent, but you allow me to exhibit your work as art. And so for 4 months, this company had this warehouse for free. And this was the opening, right? Like they all got so excited. There are so many stories about this that the owner, so here I'm trying to pose like an artist, like, oh, I'm an artist. And like, look at my army pose and boots and all. And then this guy on the left, he photobombs the picture because he's the owner of all these goods. And he got this free deal. And he was pressurizing Alserkal to give him more warehouses because Alserkal was still empty. And the curator Tyrone didn't realize, couldn't figure out is this a joke or not. And they printed their own poster for the opening. And I was like, is this my opening or their opening? And this blurring of lines between art, commerce, and industry was something, that I was looking forward to. A lot of things emerged and all these goods were just going up and down for the next 4 months because it was a market's hand, as they fashionably say, borrowing from Adams, that was shaping the sculptures, not me. I mean, there are a lot of stories, but I just can't get into all of this right now. But then there were 5 talks that were held by Murtaza Wali, who spoke about the formalism and the art historic context. And Neha Vora was an anthropologist who extensively engaged with UAE's Indian trading industry. So I had talks with Tyrone Bastian and myself, conducted these programming within the warehouse. And this was translated also into a book. And the book is online somewhere. So if you look around, there's an artist's book with all these talks and images. And also, like, what was insane was this warehouse was full of toys. There was only toys out there. So there were all these ludicrous titles like Lala Loopsy's Super Silly Medium. And I remember my mentor from NYU Abu Dhabi, Deborah Levine, at that point, I was engaging with her through the critical practice program. And I've been fortunate to be part of the critical practice program, part of Campus Art Dubai, which Murtaza and Uzma have led, and Sheikh Salama's C Foundation, which had a visiting faculty from WISD. But anyhow, Deborah Levine was like, wow, Lala Loopsy's Super Silly doll, like, who needs artists? Capitalism is far more inventive than you artists. And so I documented all these images with all these toy names, which was at some point shown at a gallery. But yeah, I'm going to move on to like a couple of more projects, which is called Train to Rouen. Train to Rouen was a commission that I got that was exhibited at the Louvre, Abu Dhabi, the Louvre. I don't know how to pronounce that, man, still. But I don't know. I think that UAE artists get this unfair, opportunities to exhibit at a place like the Louvre. But very briefly, my work called Train to Rouen essentially was an intervention within the French railways, where I managed to delay a train by 5 minutes. That was the aesthetic gesture. Let me speak about it. I don't know if I can kind of finish this up, but essentially I was asked to work with a company called MTX, which makes these very beautiful things with ribbons and ropes and architectural embroidery, as they call it. But their office, or the atelier, was located just next to the Gare Saint-Lazare station, which is this one. And this is this is a really important painting for me. When I was a kid in Bombay, my parents got us an encyclopedia, and I saw this painting over here, and I was totally blown by it. And I was like, hold on, this painting, and there were a few versions, was also going to come for the opening of the Louvre Abu Dhabi. So I started speaking with an art historian, and my concern at that point was the tension between the steam and the grids. But then he brought a really important thing to my attention, that back in the day, in the 19th century, railway stations would maintain 2 clocks. So one clock was the local time of, say, a place like Marseille, which was based on the solar clock, right? And the other clock was based on the railway time. So it would be, say, Paris time. So if it was 12 p.m. in Marseille, it would be 12:10 p.m. in Paris. So there was a lot of confusion because of this. So at some point, they collapsed all these different time zones and unified time zones. In the case of Paris, and this happened across the world, but in the case of Paris, somewhere in the late 19th century, Paris time was enforced upon the entire country, not the colonized regions, but just metropolitan France or whatever it was called. And so essentially all these cities lost their natural relationship with sunlight. Along comes, but at that point when they introduced this unification of time, they also introduced this 5-minute delay. And this delay was for the benefit of non-punctual customers, because people were still trying to figure out, like, hey, hold on, like, all this stuff is going on. I need some more time to finish my cigarette or gossip with someone. And there were all these private railway companies at that point. And so this 5-minute delay for me is a really important improvisation, the way I think about it. That it wasn't like time was completely structured and rigid. There was a little bit of gap. Alongside, I was researching Monet's paintings, and when he was trying to think about these paintings, in a book by Renoir's son, he speaks about this desire to delay a train from Gare Saint-Lazare to Rouen, which is an hour and a half away from Paris, and Gare Saint-Lazare is in Paris, to delay a train by half an hour because the light would be perfect then. So this railway station still has this roof grid where light filters through in. And Monet essentially was a painter who painted light. And so I found this intense and beautiful contradiction, that here's a person who's celebrating modernity and locomotives in the railway that fractured a relationship with light. But he's expressing this through a painting which depends on his relationship with natural light. So based on this research, I sort of put a lot of proposals, but I made a proposal to the railway station that I want you to delay a train from Paris to Rouen by 5 minutes. And they agreed as an artistic gesture. And so this gesture was registered on this document, which is called a traffic chart, which is an internal railway document, where it specifies how long a train is supposed to wait on a station. And so when I met them, I said, what is this? This is like a musical score to me. He said, yeah, exactly. We think about this as a musical score that we give to railway operators, and they play out the trains in the street. And I said, hold on, this is my research, and I want to delay this train. And so they did delay the train. And I mean, there's a lot more I can speak about, but essentially this chart was translated into this artwork. And this artwork is, again, thinking about Foucauldian structures of architecture and imprisonment, but these ribbons are flowing through, like the notion of time being flexible and time being rigid. So it's quite a complex work, but it is also made by an atelier. So it's a layered piece, but that was a work that I did in 2017. And I'm trying to rethink how to even do this project, because I'm very interested in the sound of the train when it was delayed and to work with it. But yeah, I don't know, like, should I go on, or like, there's a couple of more projects I showed recently. A dark room for my thesis show, which deals with the Met Museum. But I don't know, like, Sarah, you tell me, because I can just keep going on, and I know, like, people.
Can I ask how many projects there are left?
The 18.
18?
Yeah. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh my God, because when we spoke, you said 5. I was like, oh, wow.
Yeah, I have a couple of more projects I'll briefly discuss, but yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'll just discuss, like, I won't discuss this one, but this is a show I had at IBD recently. But just to briefly tell you what I'm doing, I'm working on this project called Vida. Vida means house in Malayalam, the south of India and Kerala. And I'm interested in how Gulf aesthetics, architectural aesthetics are influencing homes over there, because so much of Gulf currency is remitted back into Kerala. 30% of Kerala state's income comes through remittance from Gulf states. And so in the process, there's not just a remittance of aesthetics, but there's a remittance. There's not just a remittance of currency, but there's a remittance of aesthetics and aspirational and architectural styles. So for the past 4 years, I've been following the story of a family designing a house with an architect, and I have hours and hours of AutoCAD footage of how a house design is developed and how it's influenced by a villa in Dubai. But I think what's emerged through this is, and they all got so invested in the project, what's emerged is much more larger questions about a South Asian male. What does it mean to be out here, and what does it mean to go back and reintegrate into that society? And the questions of masculinity are coming through. So the design is not just about visuals, but this person has revealed a lot more about himself by articulating his design and insisting on changes to the architect. So it's going to be a longer video piece. And since you asked me what I did at the Whitney ISP, which I think I will just briefly discuss, there are these two projects that I'm working on. One is a video project, which is sort of a proposal called Dance Monument Dance. And I'm really sort of working through these, like it's not resolved. Yeah, I'm interested in this question of stasis and movement, and stasis as in an ideological stasis, things like repetition of labor, repetition of reproduction of labor, or a rebirth of certain ideological systems that we're seeing in our world today, and movement as the shift to break away from these hegemonic structures. And so I think about this notion of stasis and movement through these ideas of monument and dance, and monument as stasis. But I find again a contradiction. And so this project is trying to think through a very important African-American performer, James Brown. And he has a statue in Augusta, in down south in Georgia. It's a bronze statue. And I'm trying to work towards a proposal to the city of Augusta. And the proposal is called James Brown Recast Ritual. And yeah, what I'm proposing is to melt the statue and recast it in its original mold. And so I'm trying to think about, and it's a conceptual move. It's a very difficult and harsh move. But in my video or text piece, which is there online, I try to give a poetic thesis for it. But for me, the melting and recasting is a way of inscribing movement into stillness, but trying to think about how the molecular reconstitution of this bronze statue is a metaphor for a molecular reconstitution of the self. And of course, James Brown is a figure that has, you can question a lot of things, but essentially, I really think about his life as a movement. Right, he did not stop dancing for almost 5 decades, and that movement for me represents an inner churning, and this question where he never wanted to return to, poverty. He was always driven to kind of, move away from it. So what drove his music, or what drove his movement, was, a system that was designed to oppress him, but he just went on. So it's an ode to this really important figure, and I've been lucky enough to see Michael Jackson perform in Bombay, and that introduced me to the history of African American music. So it's a very difficult project for me, and this project was supposed to come out in 2020 in May, and it came out at that point, and that's when the George Floyd protests, opened up, and so I'm trying to reconcile and rethink, how do I deal with this project? But again, some of my projects are just proposals, elaborate proposals, and I don't know, like maybe I'll just end it at that. Yeah.
That sounds good.
All right. Thank you so much for letting me rant.
No, our pleasure, honestly. If anyone has any questions for what we just saw, you can feel free to unmute and we can have if everyone is willing to stay 15, maximum 20 more minutes just to have a conversation around the work, or if you'd like to have more details about a certain project, now would be the time to ask Vikram. And if not, I have a few questions myself. Actually, there was one in the chat box quite earlier, but anyone feel free to jump in at any time. Patrick is asking for the work with the boulders. Who supports?
He mentioned that was the washing the boulders. Do you think it's kind of an interesting thing, the idea of washing the boulders because they're dusty? I mean, I realize, I mean, I lived in the UAE for 5 years, and yeah, I was one of the people who spoke at the warehouse project. But the thing is that was interesting is that I think this is kind of a curious thing, is if you have a car or if you have something that's in UAE, it gets dusty. And
Yeah.
This juxtaposition between the quotidian life in the UAE and then also these kind of sublime gestures, like washing the elephants. I think there's this juxtaposition I thought was very interesting in this work, and that's one thing I really enjoyed about it.
Great.
And Nagin gives her best.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, honey. Yeah.
I have a question in terms of just the overall approach to your projects. I was trying to pin down a question. I'm not sure if it's going to come out as clearly as I hoped, but a lot of your projects interfere with the landscape in some way, in the environment. And I was just wondering, do you see it more as a change or a recreation? And with that interference, does it become a new landscape, or are there hints of the old? So this is something that was stirring in my mind as you were speaking.
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel, I think when you speak about the landscape and the public space, I think a lot about Lefebvre's idea of right to the city. That's been important for me, and even the notion of public sites as sites where play needs to be performed. So for me, it's always not always, but I find it as acts of improvisation, that there are available potentials, within these landscapes or sites, and I wouldn't call it an alteration or erasure, but it is these very slight shifts, which I would say I would say invisible realignments, at times. But I would say it's not beyond that. Like things return back, the goods go back, the roundabout also went back to, what it had to. But then, yeah, I think that the residue is left elsewhere, which is where the shift is.
And also you have a certain process, and you're speaking about how a project takes a few years to cultivate and research about, but has there been a time where you've worked quite intuitively?
I think, yeah, most of my projects begin with, I think there are various, sort of approaches within each work, but at the end, I always go back to my intuitions and encounters. I never ever, I consciously try to hold them on. Like to give you an example, there are certain painters I really like, since my childhood, and I've decided I never want to read about them. I just want to embrace them as the way I've known them, or like there are certain relationships with color that I have. I just want to hold on to those. And I feel within my projects as well, because there are so many multiple conversations I'm having, I have to also depend on what feels correct. I mean, for me, that feeling, I do a lot of analysis as well, but I'm interested in thinking that within my feeling is also a lot of knowledge. You know, I think that as you research, your knowledge doesn't have to be very much spelled out in front of you. You know, it all comes through these intuitive decisions. That's the way I see it.
Thank you. And yes.
Can I pop in?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. First of all, hello, everybody. Greetings from Dublin in Ireland. It's absolutely fantastic to see you, Vikram. Lovely to see you on screen too. You know, all of the conversation today, you know, what struck me most, apart from the work, was that word relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Your relationship with stone, with earth, and ultimately your relationship with people in terms of, you know, seeing the vision and to collaborate at a really, dare I say, lovely relationship with, to see the vision suddenly manifest itself, you know. Can you just talk about that a little bit in terms of relationships and how you go about it, and not only relationship with stone and the earth and this or whatever it is, but also, you know, when you arrive at the concept and then take it into a relationship and a conversation with those around you to actually realize the vision. That's what really I found that really inspiring too, you know, because ultimately what we want to do is to get to work, manifest it, you know. So relationships, yeah. And also our own relationship when we were together in Dubai, you know, and how we worked together at that particular time to take that kind of relationship into your art, you know. And dare I say, I hope I'm not sounding patronizing, but where we've come from and where I see you today, congratulations. It's beautiful.
Sorry?
From where we started out in our own relationship to where you are today in your art, I just want to say congratulations, because it's beautiful.
Yeah, thank you so much, Marty. You've been a great supporter, and I've been fortunate for all these years. But yeah, as you mentioned, the word relationships. I mean, I speak about this sometimes. Is that I mean, that maybe I didn't have a studio for so many years, and I started working with people out there, and I've always been amazed by people's skills within different areas. You know, that we segregate an art skill as against a non-art skill. I'm a big fan of I think I wrote about this recently somewhere, but there's a word called riyaz in Urdu, and riyaz means practice, and it's a word often used in Hindustani classical music. So musicians would wake up every day and practice for hours till they reach a certain level. And that's always associated within the realm of classical arts, right? But then when I think about, say, the rock blasting engineer, like he had a riyaz, like he actually was, he had a fine-tuned aesthetic of how to demolish these mountains, you know, and so I find a certain joy in activating those potentials, but not in the service of, you know, what is just meant to be. That's one way of thinking about it. Or the gardeners have an understanding of, you know, how to grow things, like, and that's not realized over there. So there are all these unrealized potentials that I began working with in ways. But on the other hand, yeah, I like people, like, you know, I just sort of like to hang out with people, meet people. I think there's something about, like, also growing up in India or Beirut, where when you step out, you know, you are always in conversation with people. Like, I still don't, you know, I don't call for delivery at home. Like, we just go out and buy the food, you know, like there's something about that basic human exchange. For me, that's actually, as you said, that is the materiality of the work. You know, there's a really important artist named Mary Uchilles Lederman. I met her at Columbia. She's the only artist with whom I have a selfie. And she spent like 30 years or 40 years in the New York sanitation department. And she set up her own residency out there. And one of her projects is she went and shook her hands with every person working in the sanitation department in New York. And for me, the materiality of that work is so poignant. It's just so poetic. Um, um, and it's just it's a genuine joy, you know, when you meet people, you engage with them. And also I realize that I cannot, you know, achieve what I want to by myself. You know, they will take the project much more beyond than I can. And I find a certain joy in creating these platforms where people take them over, you know, so the round, it's like even the hedges, eventually the gardeners wanted to keep the hedges. And so they stayed on for at least 7 years. I think it's only during the pandemic they couldn't maintain them. So there's a sense of ownership which gets transferred. It just doesn't belong to me. And I think these are important, you know, values for me in terms of community. Like, I think even growing up in Bombay, I remember like our neighbors would always be there for us. You know, if anything happened, they would just come and help us. There was no sort of hesitance, you know. And I feel when you go and reach out and meet people, they are ready to help you out, you know. And there's respect out there, there's learning out there, you know, which I think adds, I think that's an important value to the work. And then it also belongs in different spaces, right? It doesn't just belong to, you know, the white cube space of the gallery. Maybe also because living in Dubai also in some way isolates you. And I felt like this was a way of trying to move within different circles. And I work with different people. You know, I'm working with an architect right now. I'm working with, you know, somebody who's much more skilled than me, somebody who's much more de-skilled. You know, yeah, I like to be within multiple conversations. And I think that it is, if I think about it, like sometimes in a day, I'm meeting like, you know, a curator, a scholar, then I meet like a mason, and I meet an engineer, or I meet people where I would work. And I feel like it's the differences within these encounters, which also is a creative spark for me. You know, it's almost like having a hot shower, cold shower, hot shower, cold shower. And for me, that also is important to jog my thoughts. I feel like someone said, Vikram, your studio is in your mind. And for me to keep that rolling, you know, I need that. That's like the juice that is all around us. And I think we go back to the earlier story about like Plato or Socrates, you know, that why should philosophy only happen within institutions? It should infect the world, you know, and I don't know whether I don't see myself as a philosopher, you know, but I do believe that things need to seep out and belong to more people. And that's what is more joyful.
Thanks.
Thanks. Can I ask a question, please? Vikram, this is Arman. Thank you very much for the talk today. I wanted to ask about the Sikka project and the pavement bricks. When those were first installed for the Sikka project by the master bricklayer under your time constraints, would his work become the authored work to move to Venice, or was at Venice the bricks relaid in a different configuration?
Oh, it's always changing.
Ah, right.
Yeah, I don't like, that's for me, that's for me is arresting the work. You know, for me, I just love the idea of I think improvisation and movement are forms that, you know, that really interest me a lot. I mean, improvisation is popularly, you know, credited to jazz in that sense, but I feel it's all around, you know, in how you cross a street in Bombay is improvisation. You know, I wouldn't want to go on the signal and take the same route every day. So in a sense, yeah, I would never think about redoing it.
Thanks. And only I think the French can delay the rail systems. It's a testament to their to the value that they give to art, that they would be prepared to do something. Well done. It's a great achievement.
Great.
I have a quick question, if that's okay.
Yeah, Mohammed, of course.
I wanted to know, where are the bricks now? And also, you said the bricks came from the Kubeba bus station. So what happened in that section over there? Did they replace it with different bricks, or like, how did that go about?
Yeah, those bricks were replaced because there were some repair works out there. So I was put in touch with a contractor who would go about repairing parts of the city. So then I found out that this is going to be ripped off, and so I think that they replaced it, of course. And then the bricks right now are actually in storage.
We have a question from Patrick.
Oh, I hope I answered your question.
Yep, you did. Thank you.
Sorry about that. We have a question from Patrick in the chat box that says, do you think your practice has been affected by your studies and time in the Whitney program? And if so, what influences do you see them taking on your systems approach?
I mean, I would say affected, I would say also influenced a lot. This is the first time I had a studio for like 2 years, and so even like my installation that I didn't discuss today was just a, so while I was in Colombia, like my studio, I had 2 large studios, and I got those large studios because I was very down in the lottery. You have a lottery system and all the studios are different. And so I didn't have any windows in my studios. And it's funny because when you come to Dubai, there's so much light, and when you go back, if it's dark, it's sort of different. But I feel like, yeah, of course, my practice has been influenced by spending so much time where I did make a lot of work. I was just constantly engaging with different departments. At Columbia, I was going to philosophy lectures, anthropology lectures, political science, urban studies, art history, critical studies, writing, but then also taking classes in painting and photogravure and video. So I was really sort of mixing things up for myself. And I feel I'm still digesting all of that. I also come from a background which is working in writing and filmmaking and design. And so I know the next few projects will see me going back to fine-tuning some of my formal skills as well, and I want to work on, like, initially, in fact, when I came to Dubai, I actually came here to make some money so I could go to film school because I wanted to become a filmmaker. But then somehow I just hung around. So I feel like those questions are coming back, I have a studio right now in Tashkil, a small studio, and I'm exploring some printmaking. But again, I've been using a demolition site as my printmaking studio. So there is that nature, but I feel there has been an influence of going to Colombia. And of course, the lockdown has affected my output. I had a difficult time last year. I don't get into that. But right now, I'm trying to work on a project with a couple of people, and I'm making sure we all are vaccinated. But yeah, the lockdown has definitely affected how I move around. But then, yeah, I'm also excited about having a studio practice, and also like the question of exhibiting, right? I'm interested in the question of, and which is not my idea, but this artist who thinks about not just making artwork, but dealing with the art gallery, like for him, the medium is exhibiting itself. Like, what does it mean to exhibit work within an art gallery? So that question of exhibiting as a medium is something I want to think about. Even online, I'm trying to kind of redo the Train to Rouen project. How do I create an atmosphere online? I'm really struggling with that. So yeah, there are a lot of questions that I have right now, but I can't float around like I did before. That's very clear.
And I know we're over time, but I'm just going to ask one last question from myself, and then we'll end it there. But with your work, you take things out of its original context or location, and it's something that's constantly changing. So I was wondering, is it important to reference the original location? And like, how do you document the changes or archive it?
Well, so I think it's kind of difficult for me to answer because it depends at times. But yeah, the context is always presented through such talks or through conversations. So even if the bricks were shown in Sikka, there was a conversation around it and where they came from. So in a sense, through language and stories and anecdotes, the city gets included in the conversation. So it's not, I don't think it's completely extracted. It is extracted informally within the exhibition space, but it is not, and it is of course extracted from its at times its socio-economic context, like those warehouse cartons.
Yeah.
But the potential to go back always remains, right? So I think, Mohammed, your question was interesting. That where are the bricks now? Should the bricks go back to the street? And that's a difficult question to answer because those bricks have come back from Venice now. So they actually have accrued a certain value. So there was this conversation with Hamad Nasser that now, like when somebody goes back from India to Dubai, they say he's Dubai return or she's Dubai return. So like they have more currency, right, to spend. Similarly, those bricks have become Venice return bricks. So there's a different, they're different now. Unlike the Sikka situation, I could have gone back and put them in the bus stand or whatever. So I feel like that's an interesting question. I feel like it's a little fluid at times, but I'm interested in the original context through conversations. And documentation has always been a problematic question for me. I think I'm influenced by land artists who document their work, and that's how you understand their work. So even when you think about, when I speak about a spiral jetty to American friends, they say, Vikram, when you go there, you'll be disappointed. Just don't go there. Do not go and see the spiral jetty. The photograph is much more interesting. And so that's something that I think a lot about, like something like how do I document, boulder plot was, for me, the video was a form of documentation, but it was also a form of improvising and making something else out of it, not just arresting it back into what it originally was, although there are photographs. So right now also I'm working with Shabir on a text-based piece. I can't speak a lot about it, but he's going to reflect on the roundabout through a poetic, approach, but using the roundabout as a departure point to think about other questions, as against just recounting what happened at the roundabout. So I'm always interested in every project as a jumping board into something else. But there is also a desperate desire to photograph work. I mean, I have to admit that.
All right, well, I think that concludes our talk today. If you have any more questions, feel free to reach out to me or Vikram to continue the conversation. And the next talk will be on March 29th, so keep a look on that. And I just wanted to thank everyone who joined us today. I know we went over time, but I think it was definitely worth it to hear Vikram speak. And a special thank you to Vikram to agreeing to be a part of this series and to give his time and his patience and his effort to put this presentation together. It was great hearing about your work. And we're very happy that you're back in the UAE.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you everyone for being here. It was great to be in this conversation always. And I'm sure next time is going to be 1 hour long, right, Sarah?
Oh, definitely. Always on time. All right. Thank you, everyone. And I had also put Vikram's website and his Instagram in the chat box if anyone would like to take note of that. And the recording will be up in a week's time for anyone that would like to track back and hear Vikram speak again. Any of the details. All right. Thank you all and have a good night.